Advocate Sheila Murthy ma'am, Mr. Senthil Kumar, other attendees, my colleague Ganesh Kumar, so all the students from Center for Immigrations and Citizenship Law. Good evening to all of you. It's a really a great day for our center for Symbiosis Law School Hyderabad. A law school having a center specifically for immigration law, and then getting opportunity to address by the persons who practice from last few decades with the champion for the cause of immigrant. It's a golden opportunity for all of us. So we are really grateful to you, ma'am. So I'd like to thank our honorable speaker, Advocate Sheila Murthy, ma'am, for taking the time out of her busy schedule to address this young mind. We are also thankful to Mr. Senthil Kumar K, Managing Attorney of Murthy Immigration Services. I heard that it is his coordinations and support that has helped the center to carry out these today's sessions. In Symbiosis Law School, Hyderabad, we prepare our students, all budding lawyers, to face the challenges that the dynamic legal field places before them as opportunities to find solutions that can protect these immigrants in need, value their rights, and protect the country socially, economically, and culturally. Providing them with the most relevant academic and practical knowledge in this subject at a domestic and global level for the experience of our experts, so that they may pave a path for their own success academically or in any other field, achieving more from beyond the classroom learning. So this is one of the exercise. So platform like this webinar, developing further and ultimately actualizing their vision and mission with the needs and goals of the session. Ma'am, in Symbiosis Law School, Hyderabad, we have almost 19 centers, and one of the centers, very active centers of Symbiosis, is immigrations and citizenship law. I'm very proud to just share with you that just in recent part, just few months ago, before pandemic, we had planned to conduct our national seminar, and it's delayed, but then we conducted online on immigrations issues, and the outcome of that conference will be in a volume of publications in a book format, which will publish soon in next few months. So we are all working on the manuscript. So in that way, academically, our centers are consistently working for bring forth literature, bring forth the informations which can be disseminated among the peoples or citizens of this country. Advocate Murthy has worked with dedications and discipline to get to where she is in her professional life, and we have seen your videos, and it's really amazing. We are really grateful to you. With the discussion that this theme will facilitate, she will be able to share her vision and the path she close to follow, overcoming professionals and personal hardship to become one of the most reputed and well-decorated immigration lawyer globally. She will provide all of you with the glimpse into the different perspective in this field of study, and we hope that these distinctions will also enlighten you as the indispensable skill required in these professions, including leaderships and crisis management, when studying and debating matters of such national and international importance. I hope this event can prove to be huge success and of value to all of you. I hope this ma'am's deliberations will encourage our students to choose the path of litigations also, which is a real charm in a legal profession. So, and we can able to help a large number of people. So your experience, your thought will definitely is going to help our students who can be, some of them can become activists, some of them can going to help in future. They are all futures lawyers, judges of this country. So they can be activists for immigrant and providing at least support, protecting the human rights of women. I'm also happy to share with you that Symbiosis Law School Hyderabad is one of the law school which we always feel proud that majority of the students today are girls. So we have almost more than 60%, 60 to 65%, depending on the batch, the number of girls students are there in Symbiosis, and we always feel proud on this issue. So these young lawyers who will pass out from the Symbiosis, they all our messenger, and they will be working for the rights of the people, and your lecture is definitely it's a move forward for this direction. So once again, I welcome you all, and I hope you enjoy this confluence. So, and thank you, ma'am, again for accepting our invitations and conducting these programs. Symbiosis Law School Hyderabad is one of the academic institutions which want to work with different institutions. So your relation, your this program is not the end; it will be a beginning. With any ways you consider the Symbiosis Law School Hyderabad can. Our students can be part of any initiatives, activities, pro bono works. We are always there. So with these few words, I welcome all of you and thank you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation.
Over. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad, and thank you so much for the incredible opportunity and privilege of sharing some ideas and thoughts and hopefully having a wonderful, vibrant exchange of ideas with your students this evening. The very fact that you all have created one of the few citizenship and immigration committees among any law schools in India shows the leadership, the creativity, and the determination for Symbiosis Law School Hyderabad to truly create an impact in this field, not just within India, hopefully, but across the globe. So congratulations to you and every one of your students for your vision, your mission, your leadership. And I am truly honored to share some ideas and questions. And as I look at the faces of the students, when I look at it on my screen and I see them, I see a part of me from 35 years ago in India, as I was so determined to fight for justice and make a difference and impact lives and truly change the world in our way. And when each of us changes the world in our own way, we end up making an incredible, valuable, and meaningful difference in our lives. So thank you for this privilege and opportunity. And I hope to have a fun discussion and session to entertain, empower, educate, and enlighten each and every one of you that has invested your time this evening to join me. So thank you, and thank you to you, and thank you to Senthil for sharing the email and making this happen. And thanks to each of you who are participating today and making time for this session. Thank you, Dr. Ahmad.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
I think the students are now going to start with a question and answer. Are we starting with a question and answer?
Everybody, respected Advocate Sheila Murthy ma'am, Mr. Senthil Kumar, a director sir, and the other members of the audience. Today, on the behalf of Center for Immigration and Citizenship Law and the Symbiosis Law School Hyderabad, I welcome you all to the guest lecture called Life of an Immigration Lawyer. I would like to thank our honorable speaker ma'am, Advocate Sheila Murthy, for taking out time from her busy schedule to address these young minds. Among the various centers at Symbiosis Law School Hyderabad, Center for Immigration and Citizenship Law has been actively involved in various activities concerning immigration and citizenship. The primary objective of the center is to provide guidance to the students who have an interest in the field of immigration law and to nurture their interest into a fruitful career, and also to channelize social help for the needy immigrants and migrants. We are lucky to have Advocate Murthy with us today. She is a multifaceted personality, best described as a lawyer for the people. She also happens to be an entrepreneur and a philanthropist. Having founded the Murthy Law Firm in Maryland, USA, with the work this immigration law firm has done, it is no surprise that the firm was ranked one of the world's leading US immigration law firms. Mrs. Murthy's journey hasn't been smooth sailing, as we hope to hear a lot more about her move from India. Her inspiration to set up the Murthy Nayak Foundation for donations and aid to women and children and immigrants in need, especially in education and healthcare, and her educational and professional choices that led to her successes. We are thankful to Mr. Senthil Kumar, Managing Attorney of Murthy Immigration Services Private Limited. It is his coordination and support that has helped us, the center, to carry out today's session so smoothly. Today's theme of concern, ladies and gentlemen, is life of an immigration lawyer. Among the new 2020-25 batch, an air of doubt prevails as to the available avenues of study and research they could follow. As they embark on this 5-year journey, similarly, the batch of 2016 to 21 batch is on the verge of beginning a new chapter in their lives and must now they explore the various paths they can choose from. To help them, the event has been planned in such a way that every attendee is given an opportunity to interact with our guest. This interactive session is with the hope to promote and exchange ideas among such a well-researched and experienced expert with practical experience and students of law with a wealth of theoretical knowledge. We hope that the event can prove to be a huge success and value to all of you. We'll begin today's session with our center member Sampada Bansal, who will host a game called What's on Your Phone, in conversation with our honorable speaker. This will give us an insight into her busy schedule as a lawyer. Further on, we'll dive into an interactive session, which is divided into two segments. The first one is Let's Get Motivated, and the second one is Let's Fire It Up. The moderator for the first segment will be Anushka Mishra, a founder and president. She's a fifth-year BA LLB student who has started this center after a conversation with a Bangladeshi under-trial prisoner in the Alipore Central Jail. He told her that he had been treated differently in the hands of justice just because he was an illegal migrant. Anushka knew she had to be the change. The moderator for the second segment will be Dylan Sharma, a researcher head. A fifth-year BBA LLB student. His interest lies in human rights and humanitarian and refugee law. Being a strong debater and leader, he hopes to engage more and more students in these fields of law. There'll be a question-answer session for our audience after each segment, which will be moderated by Saloni Atul Kumar, our PR and media head. A second-year BA LLB student, a debater and an avid reader. She believes that the changes starts with education. She uses her position to educate our audience about issues of regional and international importance. If the audience wishes to ask questions during the session, they can drop them down in the chat box. If the question is not already covered, they'll be put forward for discussion. With this, I thank each and every one of you for being here today. And now I would like to invite Advocate Sheela Murthy and Sampada Bansal to start with an ice-breaking session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you for that very kind introduction.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, since we've got this privilege to interact with you, so we have a couple of questions that we're curious about. So, ma'am, the first question is, how many alarms are there in your phone, or normally do you have?
So actually this morning, I definitely had it for your session. For me, it's morning. Of course, it's late evening for you all in India. But I'm a creature of habit. So I sleep at the same time. I wake up at the same time. My life is actually quite structured and organized in general. So I have scheduled like 6 or 7 alarm slots, but I don't really use them because my entire day is very planned and structured. For example, if I have a consultation at a particular time, the client in America, unlike in India, which I understood when I spoke yesterday with Anushka and Sohani and Dylan, was that they will call exactly at that moment because we give very limited. It's like a 20-minute paid consultation. I understood we're talking with Mr. Senthil Kumar, our Indian attorney heading up our India operations, that in India, if you give people 20 minutes, they will be very insulted. People want at least 1 hour consultation with the lawyer to feel justified. So, it's a long-winded way to say, I have the alarms, I don't necessarily use it, but my life here and in America, everything is perfectly structured. It's like almost like a train compartment attached to each other, back to back appointments I have on many days of the week.
That's great, ma'am. We'll also learn this from you. So the second question is, ma'am, how many unread emails are there in your inbox today?
You know something? Before I knew I was going to do this or you were going to ask these questions, about 3 days ago, I literally had, I forget how many, several hundreds of unread emails was bothering me. So I started at maybe 9 or 10. It was actually right after the Kamala Harris Mike Pence debate at 10:30 at night. And I stayed up till I think 3 o'clock in the morning and I cleaned up my inbox because it was just bothering me. So it became 0 on Wednesday. Now this morning, while I'm talking to you, I can hear the beeping sounds coming in, but it's not much. It's less than 50 or 100. So I'm feeling great. I'm caught up. I'm feeling organized for
That's lovely,
that doesn't
ma'am.
happen all the time.
Yeah, that's lovely. So, ma'am, the next question is, how many work calls do you get in a day regularly? Like,
So because of the way our firm is set up, because I have about 100 people in my law firm, and I'm the president and CEO. I am not the managing attorney. I've actually hired an attorney who has been with me for over 20 years, whom you may have seen in one of the TV photos or the introductions, Aaron Finkelstein. So he's our managing attorney. I have 3 assistant managing attorneys in the firm, 2 women attorneys, advocates, and 1 male. And so I can afford to actually not have to monitor day-to-day running of the firm. So I can do what I love to do, which is advise, empower, motivate, and inspire people like all of you, students, law students, and my clients. So a lot of times when I do consultations with clients, if I have 5 minutes left at the end, and a woman tells me when she's crying that her marriage is breaking up or she's being abused, I try to inspire and motivate them. And I say, please don't let this incident or this bad marriage upset you or change your life or make you sad. Believe that God has done it for a reason to make you better and stronger and more powerful. And so I invest time because I feel that as lawyers, we have so much power because our clients look at us almost like God, right? They look at you like you have so much power in your hands, and each of you is going to have to deal with that. So don't let the power get to your head. Think that it is an opportunity given to you by whatever your God is. It's ultimately, we all are part of a creation to help another fellow human being to get empowered and feel that they can change their life because they spoke to you.
thank you, ma'am, for this. Ma'am, so the last question, so we'll wrap up this round. So, how many meetings are scheduled in your calendar?
So usually I have about between 10 and 15 per day. And as I told you, it's back to back to back appointments. So, and it's in short spans of 20 minutes. And then I get 5-10 minutes to type notes or do something, or just call somebody to follow up on sending out the legal agreement, and then the next appointment, and then the next appointment. Then I get a break to catch up, to call the office to check on things. Now, like most people around the world, because of COVID-19, we're not doing in person. We're not meeting clients in person yet in America. We are mostly doing all of the work by emails and by video conference.
All right, thank you, ma'am.
Sure. And whoever is on the phone, can we ask them to put it on mute?
Sarani, can you check? Yeah.
Perfect.
So, ma'am, we can start with our next segment. That is, let's get motivated. And I'm very tense. Like 10 years, like 10 events I've organized, but this is the most tense I'm getting today. So,
Oh my God, please don't. I believe in fun discussion and conversation. Honestly, Anushka, just hearing how you decided to start and create the Center for Immigration and Citizenship Law Committee within the school, and because you spoke to a Bangladeshi person who was in the prison in India, really, in fact, inspired and motivated me. I was like, wow, I didn't know that about Anushka yesterday. I wish we had talked and introduced each other a little more, because opposite, you should feel excited and inspired, not tense.
yes, ma'am. So let's get that go and let's just jump right into it. So I was watching this video, Those Who Made It. And exactly in its 4 minutes, 27 seconds, I took a pause and I was like, oh my God, this is my life being repeated. So you said that you wanted to study history. Me, 5 years back, when I passed out ISC, I wanted to do the same. And after a real hot table conversation, my father said, Anushka, you got to get this straight. If you want our support, you don't get to study history. Please do something viable. And I had got a St. Stephen's. I had got 100 out of 100, like not going so in depth, but I was not allowed. And now that I'm so finally proud of being a lawyer or going to be a law student, I want to know that you took a decision of being a history student and then you transferred to law. So tell us that, stigma that went through you and why you could do it, the support, and, your mom, you say, is a very good role model to you. Just tell us a little about that.
Sure, be honored and delighted. I'm actually more excited about you, but I know people are not going to be happy. But so you got 100 on 100 in history at St. Stephen's. And what did you end up studying?
And Stephen, in my ISC, after I did my book.
And what was your undergrad? What did you study in your undergrad?
I didn't do undergraduation. I came and did 5 years BLLB with Symbiosis.
So we didn't have the 5-year integrated program
Then
you did back in 1982.
Yeah, right.
So I can tell you exactly what all of you went through. I went through the same thing.
Yeah.
Remember, both my sisters are medical doctors, right? So both
Yeah.
are doctors and they both are brilliant. And at dinner time, they talk calculus and trigonometry at dinner table. My father is an electrical, civil engineer, civil and structural engineer, masters. My mother has her, bachelor's in education. She was a teacher and all of that. And so when I say history, my father is literally saying, there's nothing more useless on this earth than history. Really, in their mind, nothing more useless. He even said, what good is history to you? How will it help you in life? And I remember telling him, I love history. It's when you learn, history repeats itself. When you learn from the past mistakes, we can improve and become a better society, a stronger society. And let me do something I love and I can shine in. And his answer was, no, even English is better. At least you can be English literature. You can become an English teacher. What can you do with history in life? And only when I got admission into Harvard Law School for my LLM, that he was almost kind of surprised and pleased and happy, I guess, that I was not so dumb after all. I always grew up feeling very, I don't want to use the word inferior, that wouldn't be right, but I always felt a little bit lower compared to, two brilliant sisters who could have become doctors or engineers or anything. But I hate maths. I think most lawyers hate mathematics, and I hate blood. The idea of waking up in the middle of the night to take care of somebody's physical health did not excite me. So medicine and law, and I remember my teacher in high school, Mrs. Savita, chemistry teacher, said, you have such nice, good, strong grades. Sheila, why are you not doing science? And I said, no, ma'am, I don't like science. I don't want to do science. And I remember she was so disappointed and dejected. But you know something? In the end of the day, each of us has to only do what we feel passionate and connected about. Even when I wanted to do law, those days, 35 years ago in India, law was not a well-respected profession. If you were not a doctor and engineer, you were nobody. And so it was not well-respected. And I remember saying, I'm going to fight for justice and rights of underprivileged. I am going to be a strong woman role model. I will, people, when they see me, they should be a little scared and nervous, because I would see how people were scared of my father who was in the army. How his soldiers would salute him and respect him and be very scared. So I thought they should be scared. Even if we are women, they should be afraid of us, because they know we have power, we have control, we understand complex laws. And so, you know what, because I believed in it, I was able to shine in it. And I remember even now, my older sister, I don't think she's listening today, God bless her if she is, who's well established in Bangalore as a doctor. For 20 years, she used to say,
Yeah, my internet got locked out, I guess. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So that's absolutely, I think this is a wonderful answer to all our freshers who've just come in and they're still undecided, whether I've made the right choice. Because back then, guys, even all of us thought we are making the right choice, but it is always about going forward and taking the right decision. You know, ma'am, even when Justice Sikri came, he said that he's 66, like 6 years elder to you. And he mentioned that when he went to law school, his professor used to tell that you guys don't come here to study law, but find your in-laws. So that was a very fun joke.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, you know, you just answered my very, like, you know, a very frustrating question that all of us face, that why law? So you answered that for me. But you being a woman at that era, you know, trying to go forward, you had a family support. Your father was happy about it, or did the society even look down upon you because you wanted to go beyond the shackles and do something, you know, outright?
So nobody looked down. I mean, as I said, they kind of said, oh, okay, she's going to do what she does. She poor thing, she's going to be poor and hungry because she wants to do law instead of doing medicine or engineering as a doctor. And, you know, I remember most of the classmates that were in law school that time at University Law College, Bangalore, which was the best law college those days because there was no national law school, nothing was there. Even when I went to do the Philip Jessup moot court competition and I stood first all India and third best in the world, I remember people were like, yes, thank you. I remember when I asked one of the classmates, do you want to be my teammate? Even though I had stood first in the law school, I said to be my teammate to represent India. She was like, what a waste of time. I don't want to waste. Nothing will come out of this. What's the use of it? And if I have to say that one thing that changed my life, helped me to get admission into Harvard Law School, gave me self-confidence, was participating in that moot court competition, because I thought, oh my God, I've come first all India, and then in the world, I got the third best individual oralist in the world, second best team written memorial prize. And I thought, really? Because I told you my whole life I grew up with the little bit inferiority complex that, hey, I'm not that smart or intelligent compared to 99.9% of the world, but I have passion, I have interest, I have the desire to fight for justice. But when I did so well, I was also a little surprised that, oh, maybe I do have a talent. Maybe this is a God-given talent. So let me use it. So people didn't think it was anything. People thought it was a waste of time. Like you said, most men and women, I remember a lot of my classmates in law college those days joined only to get free hostel admission so that they can pursue. One of them did CPA, CA in India. Many of the girls just did it till they got married. It was not a serious profession. But for me, it was 100% serious profession.
Serious, right? You know, you answered one of the very brilliant questions that one of my first years came and told me, I'm getting intimidated with my batch. I don't know what to do. I'm an introvert. I'm not sure. So that's a great answer to that question. And ma'am, if I can just take you back to that day, early morning, you wake up and you get a sealed envelope from Harvard and you just chuckles up, you're opening it and you want to read it, your hands are shaking. And then you read, we are honored to inform you that you have been selected to Harvard LLM program. Ma'am, tell us the days after that, your full shield and your transition to America. So if you, like, what was it like the experience? And through the video, but we want to take it from you, like, that day experience and all of that.
Wonderful. I see my mother is trying to call me on the phone. She has no idea, so it's interesting. But no. You know, I remember getting that envelope. I remember it crystal clear. Some people had told me if it's a very thin envelope, that means it's a bad sign that they're sending you a rejection. It's a little bit thicker envelope, that means they're including some additional papers for you to complete. And it was medium thick, so I was quite excited even when I opened the envelope. I was thinking there's a chance. It said, your congratulations, we're delighted to inform you, etc. And I remember thinking, oh my God, now I've got in, and you know, how am I going to do this? Here are all these most brilliant people from around the world coming to Harvard. You know, will I be able to fit in? And then even selecting which courses I had to select, because you have, unlike in India where you have at least those days, I don't even know how much of choices of subjects to pick from what you want to study. Even just going through that exercise was stressful. You know, they always say grass is greener on the other side. You're thinking, wow, you know, everyone thinks, apparently there's a lot of research done, Anushka, that everybody thinks other people have a wonderful life and I have all the tensions and problems in the world. But in fact, every human being has tensions and problems. And instead of looking at opening that envelope and figuring, saying, you, I was like, oh my God, now how do I get the money to pay for this? How do I figure out what this means? How will I be able to succeed at Harvard? Which subject should I choose so that I can take the most advantage in this 1 year and get the most? Those days, it was $22,000 a year. It's like telling somebody it's 220. It's like telling somebody it's 1 crore per year for studying, right? It felt like that. It's actually, if you convert it today, Harvard Law School is close to, I think, $75,000 a year. That's half a crore per year of studies. How many people can afford? I mean, so we had to apply for bank loans. My father was an army officer. We were not rich. We were a very middle class family. So I was panicking about, oh my God, is this good? Is this bad? Plus, I actually got a 50% scholarship from University of Pennsylvania, from UPenn, which was also an Ivy League school back then and still is. And I was very tempted, but my father, and then I'd met my husband at that point. We had just met at the Allianz anyway. So they both said, are you crazy? No. You have to go to Harvard. Don't go to UPenn, even if it's one of the top 8 schools in the country. And it matters because clients always say, I want a Harvard lawyer. I don't want just a regular,
Yeah,
lawyer.
absolutely. Let me just stop you on that and ask you this question. Like there's this movie of Tom Cruise, The Firm. So where, every person will come and give Mitch, that is Tom Cruise, the papers and everything. Please come to our firm. Please come to our firm. Did that happen to you?
So you won't believe this. So out of about 110 people in the LLM class at Harvard Law School, more than half were for international students. So they love because they want to make it an international program. It's a good opportunity for those who are interested in further education in today's call to consider that option to study it. Most LLM programs tend to have a lot of international students. And less than 10 out of the 110 actually got permanent jobs in the United States. And I think 7 or 8 got 1 year international program. It's called International Associate at some of the large firms. I'm trying to think if I was the only person in my class that got the job, but I actually did get through 2 or 3 job offers. And I don't think it's because my grades were better. It's because of the ability to communicate and verbally communicate. Yes, people in America do get a little distracted with the Indian accent. Like when I first came from India, I thought they have a thick American accent. Of course, for them, Indians have a thick Indian accent. They don't understand. Even when we nod our head like this, they always call it the bobbing. What you're doing now, they call it the bobblehead, right? And Americans don't understand that. And so just getting over certain cultural nuances was stress. But within a few weeks, when I understood, okay, this is the culture, I have to be aggressive, proactive. If I don't believe in myself and fight for my own job, who else is going to fight for me, right? I have to. So I was determined. So I did get 2 or 3 or 4 job offers. I had several law firms interested in me, which was a big surprise, because most LLMs ended up after 1 year either going back, or almost all of them went back almost immediately. They didn't even get a 1 year international associate. So I was lucky, very lucky to get those jobs. I had another very, very good offer with a Chicago. For that. And I didn't want to. At New York, they allowed me to do the New York bar exam right away. So that's why I took up the job at White & Case in New York.
That answers one of the brilliant questions again that people keep asking, that is it always your score? It is always your scorecard that matters for your job. But, as you said, it is not always your scorecard, but what you do and what you put forward.
A little bit of both. Let me not downplay scorecards. Your marks, your grades do matter because it shows an ability to work hard, to deliver, because all of us face obstacles in life. All of us have problems, whether from the family, from home, or financial issues, or mental, emotional, whatever stress, fights with siblings, parents, friends, boyfriend, girlfriend, all that. Everybody has those problems. But how a human being is able to overcome those problems, focus on the goal, and say that I am going to make something out of my life, the ability to articulate that. And in fact, if you show them in the interview that I have overcome many obstacles in my life, because they would even ask me, what does Bangalore mean? How large is Bangalore? Remember, 35 years ago, India was, what does it mean to be in university? How would you compare Bangalore to what are cities in America? And I would say Bangalore in India is similar those days. I used to say to Boston in America, because that's where I did my interviews. A big city, but not the top tier.
Top
Now it's
tier.
of course changed with it being a Silicon
Silicon City, absolutely. It's a wonderful change, I must say that. I think I lost the signal, is it?
Ma'am, signal is a little weak.
Okay, ma'am signal. Okay, I thought I lost it. Okay. So can ma'am hear me? Can ma'am hear me?
I don't.
Yeah. What just happened?
Ma'am's having internet connection issues, I think. Just
Okay. Let's wait. Okay, guys. Till then, I hope I'll just ask one more question, and I'll take questions from you guys. So let's wait for ma'am. If you have question, guys, drop in. I hope they're dropping in the questions.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, ma'am. We can hear you. We can
yeah,
hear
we
you.
can hear.
Okay, good.
So now, like we have got through your Howard experience and this cultural shock that you faced. So now there's one story that I again want to tell you. So before I wanted to start this center, I went to my director and I said, sir, I want to open the center. And my director looked at me and he says that, Anushka, as far as I know, you were the corporate kind. Why do you want to go and start something on it? You're doing all these internships. So after that, I just gave an answer which was very handy then. I said that, you marry a person and sometimes you love a different person. So it's the same thing for me. The immigration law, I love the social humanitarian law, and I want to marry the corporate side of it. So this is also your story, ma'am, that you started as a corporate lawyer and then you drowned back to immigration. So tell us about your life as a corporate lawyer and that one day that you sat and you decided, this is it. I want to be an immigration lawyer. This is where I am. This is where I should. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so again, it comes back to what you feel connected in your life and what you feel excited and passionate to work in. So like you, I wanted the corporate law. I wanted to understand business. I love business. I love the idea of understanding money and money matters, because you can never be successful in business, even as a lawyer or any profession, unless you understand how to, if the money comes in, how to balance the checkbook, how to make sure that you always spend less than you earn. Because I know people who make a lot of money, but they're always spending more than they're making, and they're always financially in bad position. So I wanted to do corporate law to understand it. And so employment-based immigration, which is what we do, like H1s, L1s, green cards, citizenship, helping people who are stuck, people who get married, love marriage, whatever, the whole thing. All of those issues are connected with understanding corporate law and business law. And also, like you said, having a deep and meaningful impact in changing people's lives, helping them to accomplish their great American dream of living and working in this country, of sending money back to their family in other parts of the world, including India, of truly feeling like they can get peace of mind and a good sleep at night. All those to me, that I can change not just this country and the people we help, but we are helping the rest of the world and India by helping them to accomplish their dreams of living and working in America. So to me, it was a classic win-win, the emotional connection, the mental, the peace of mind that it gave them and it gave me, and not just this family, but generations coming after that. To me, that was life-changing and altering. So all of you who are interested in immigration, this is a wonderful, wonderful area to be interested in. Now, I know India has very different immigration laws, and I'm sure most of you can do a really good job and talk about it. But, we expect one set of standards from America for Indians, yet India doesn't treat our immigrants in India the same way that we expect others around the world to treat Indian immigrants. And we should not have double standards. It's human nature to have, but we should always, right? You shouldn't have double. What we expect from other countries, we should do for other country citizens.
Absolutely, ma'am. Ma'am, on that note, I would like to take some participation questions if they have a few questions, and then we will shift again to this segment. So, Saloni, do we have a few questions to have it answered?
Yeah, so to make the session interactive, we asked the students if they had any questions, and a few did come forward. So I would like to call them to come and ask ma'am the questions themselves. So what they can do is raise their hands, and we will unmute them one by one. So first, we would like to call Shweta. Is Shweta here?
Guys, you can raise your hand if you have a question. Okay.
Yes, Shubhangi. Shubhangi has a question.
Okay. Okay. Take it.
Can she unmuted?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi Shubhangi, how are you?
Hello, ma'am. Thank you. I'm fine. I'm a huge fan of yours. One of the reasons I insisted on law school, especially, was because of you. I'm a fresher. I just joined Symbiosis. So it's an honor.
Congratulations for getting into one of the best law schools in India.
Thank you very much, ma'am. So it's an honor to meet you, actually. You're a role model. And honestly, talking to you, conversing with you is like a dream come true.
Oh, thank you.
No, it's my pleasure, honestly. So I'm from Tamil Nadu, honestly. And I'm pretty much in the same background as you were in, maybe, of a sort. So my question is pretty basic. What would you advise us freshers who are stepping into the world of law, who are exploring new fields and finding what's comfortable for them? So any advice for us? If anyone-
Sure. Yeah. So what I had mentioned earlier with Anushka as well, Shubhangi, is see what areas interest you. If you like law of the seas, great. If you like, immigration, fabulous. If you like corporate law, business law, taxation law, criminal law, civil law, it doesn't matter. Just start experiencing as many areas that interest you, whatever area catches, because that is the beauty of this world. No one human being is like any other human being on this earth, even though we are over 3 billion people on this planet as I talk. No one person is exactly like another. And that's what makes us so beautiful and unique and amazing in our own way. So, there's often a saying, in a world where you can be anything, just be you. And that means you pick what excites you, what interests you, what makes you feel that you have a mental, emotional, and spiritual connection with. And then put your heart and soul into that area and be determined, because they say all success comes from visualization in your mind. So in your mind, if you visualize, I am going to be very successful in my life, I am going to be very happy in my life, I am going to do amazing things to change and help other people accomplish things, then success will come to you. Money will come to you. You cannot chase money. Money will come to you because you care about the work to such a good extent that money will automatically be attracted to you. There's a famous book called Think and Grow Rich. So all that, I believe that ultimately, see, everyone in my family thought I was going to be poor and hungry doing law. In the end, I became, doing so well that we can give away millions and millions of dollars to other people, charities, and other causes by grace of God. If somebody had told me you'll give away millions, I would have said, I won't even know what the word million means, let alone give it away, right? You can't even visualize that when you're in college. And now it's like a miracle. We sit there and we say, really, this has happened to us? That's quite a shock, that how can that happen to us? But it happened because all I did was gave 100% to helping people and doing a good job. So good luck, Shubhangi. The very fact you're thinking like that and asking the right questions means all of you are on the right track.
Thank you so much. It was such an honor to converse with you. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Shubhangi. Thank you.
Right. So can we unmute Shweta? Shweta has a question.
Hello, good evening, ma'am. I'm audible.
Hi, Shweta.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
So I learned a lot from you because you have inspired me a lot. So I have a question for you. Who inspired you, or who was your role model to become an immigration lawyer?
It's a great question, Shweta. To tell you the truth, nobody in my family for generations was anyway connected with the law. As I told you, my father was an engineer, my mother was a school teacher, my grandfather was a famous doctor, my cousins were all doctors, both my sisters are doctors in India. And as you know, in most of India, if you're not a doctor or engineer, you're not that hot kind of a. There was a distant, like a cousin's uncle, something who was a judge of the Karnataka High Court, Bangalore High Court. But I don't think I'd even met that person maybe once in my life. But they said, oh, you want to do law? You know that some 10th cousin or second cousin or uncle, somebody is a judge. So I said, oh, I see. Okay, great. And so, I thought, okay, I hate math, I hate engineering, I hate medicine. So that's not what I want to do, but I want to fight for other people. I want to fight for justice. When I see injustice in the world, when I see a woman being raped or abused or a people being starving, and there's so much excess on one side of people throwing away good food, other side people starving, just my blood used to boil, Shweta. I used to think, how can we live in a world that is so patently unfair? So I was determined that I have to do something about it. We can complain about everything and everybody, or we can say, you know what? I will do 100% from my side to make the world a better place. And that's what I strove for. And so my role model, I know my mother gets very upset when she hears this, but it is the truth. She told us her whole life, because we are three sisters, three girls, right? And in India, those days, all people used to tell, especially in North India, in Delhi and Punjab, and when we were growing up in the army, people used to tell my parents, oh, you have three daughters. Oh, how sad. You need a man to do your Shraddha and rites. Oh, you need this. They will only take care of you in old age. And I told my father, no, I will do more than any son will do for you. I will do it. And I ended up buying them cars and buying them stuff more than most 9 out of 10 sons could do. But my point, what I was saying was, my mother would always tell us, a woman has to bow her head down and listen to her husband. And I used to get so angry when she used to say that. But one day of her life, my mother never listened to my father. And children don't listen to the words. Children always look at the actions of the parents and the elders. So I learned that if I have to be bold, I have to do what I want with my life. Of course, I adore and respect my husband. Don't get me wrong. I love him beyond words. And he has supported me in everything. In fact, he's the opposite. We have opposite role reversal. He likes to be in the background. He hates to be out talking to the world, and I go out and talk. So she was my role model, to be bold and strong and confident, to speak my mind, to never be scared or afraid of anything. Many times people have told me, Sheila, be very careful, because in America, you can say a lot of things, you won't be thrown in jail. But in India, they can put you in jail if you talk like this in Indian conferences, because the whole culture is a different culture, and they don't like criticism and challenging and questions. And I said, great, if I die, I'll become even more famous. My word will be even more important. Then my husband said, oh, but I'll miss you. I said, that's okay, you'll get over it. It's not a big deal, right? And Senthil will attest to it, because in one seminar in Bangalore where I was talking with hundreds of people, I was saying something that everyone told me, don't bring up that topic. If they bring it up, change the subject. But I brought it up, and in the end, I told that person, I don't say I didn't care about the country. My father was in the army. We were all ready to die for the country. We love India. That is my country of birth. But yes, America is my adopted country. But I have love and care for both countries. And it doesn't mean because I love one or criticize one, you criticize only those that you care about and love. And I criticize because I want more for India, not less. So when I criticize, it is coming from wanting to help India to become even more better, even much better than America. That would be my dream come true. If America can change places and India can become the global superpower.
Lovely hearing your response, ma'am, and it really has inspired me to speak my mind more.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. So, can we unmute Abhinav? He has a question. Abhinav, are you unmuted?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Yes, that's correct. Good afternoon.
I can hear you.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Ma'am, it's been an absolute pleasure to listen to you. Your words are really insightful. I'm actually a fifth year law student and I'm from Bangalore myself. My question is more to do with the career aspect of things. As a law student who's going to be graduating in about 6 months' time, I want to know, is immigration law a good option for a young graduate, or do you suggest that a young lawyer should or a young graduate should focus on all aspects of law first and then come to something like immigration law later on?
So are you planning, Abhinav, I'm not clear, are you planning to study in the United States or in India, or are you talking about generally in India or in the US? I'm not clear.
Ma'am, I'm actually talking generally because I'm not very well aware. I know that immigration laws in the US are very different as compared to that of India. But just generally speaking, do you think it would be advisable for a young lawyer to start directly with something like immigration law, or just
Yeah.
test the waters and see everything?
Yes,
that is
my
question.
philosophy in general is that people should always try as much as you can, especially as a young lawyer, to see where your true passion and desire is, what excites you, interests you, and where you think you can contribute most to the world. I started off doing 1 or 2 years of corporate law, 1 year of real estate law, and
Yes,
then
ma'am.
while doing real estate law, so I did that for about 1.5 years in New York at White & Case Corporate Law. Then another 4 years I did corporate and real estate law, and only slowly got into it. Now remember, I've studied comparative immigration laws because I've gone to panels and spoken at seminars around the world, including in Austria and whatever, in London, etc. American immigration laws are the world's most complex immigration laws. And
Yes, ma'am.
it is still a country where most people are attracted to. So unless millions of people want to come to India because of wonderful financial and other opportunities in India, immigration law may not be the first place. Maybe you could do it along with something connected like employment law, where there may be a lot more issues dealing with employee
Yes, ma'am.
or employee. So in terms of the financial ability, the opportunities for you, I don't know enough about Indian economy, the demand for immigration in India, because obviously
Yes,
I've been
ma'am.
in America for 35 years, Abhinav. But
Yes,
I
ma'am.
would definitely try many areas, because right now you may think, you know what, I love it. And look, if you have a passion and there isn't that much desire, the way that Anushka got into it. You can always do something on a pro bono basis. A lot of lawyers do corporate real estate law to pay the bills, and then nights and weekends they work on helping people who have been tortured or abused or asylees or refugees, and they go to court and they get permission from the court to represent those cases, even though that is not their main area of law. So don't
Yes.
pigeonhole yourself. Don't lock yourself in an area that you will regret. I like people trying all different. So I tried 5-6 years and then did immigration. And when I did it, I really, really felt, wow, this is amazing to have this type of an impact. So you have to get that feeling with whatever area you choose.
Yes,
Good luck,
ma'am.
Abhinav.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much. That really means a lot.
Thank you
Thanks a
so
lot.
much, Abhinav, Shweta, for stealing all my questions. So I will go to the last question of my segment. So that would be, ma'am, if you could share with us a few funny experience or a few challenging experience, or a few demoralizing experience even, so that we could learn a few lessons from the client interaction that you've had.
Sure. So, in fact, I should tell you this. There's a book that's coming out, a biography. The title is Being Sheila, The Life Journey of an Immigration Lawyer. It's coming out next week, a week from today.
Oh
It is
my
coming
God,
out this week. HarperCollins India is publishing it, HarperCollins, and it's going to be available for sale, I think, on Amazon India. And trust me, the price in India is 1/4 the price in America. So you all are getting 75% discount in India
We will
already.
make a request from our center.
And the
get it.
reason I'm saying that is that it talks about multiple cases in my life the past 25, 30 years, 26 years in my own law firm, of what cases we've done. So examples were very inspiring, very interesting, where people used to come to me even when I was first starting my practice in my own firm. So I was only 4 or 5 years. I wasn't very knowledgeable in the area. And I think one of the questions somebody was asking was, how do you answer a question if you don't know? Maybe that's coming from more audience questions from Sohani or whatever. But, people would say to me, Miss Murthy, I'm tired. People told me to call you, but I've already been waiting. My wife and I are separated because consulate is refusing in Mumbai to give me the visa. And now I want to go back to India and pack up my life here because I cannot be separated from I told this guy whom I was talking to, okay, you have talked to calling me, Sheila Murthy of Murthy.com today for the first time in your life. And you're calling me to spend your hard-earned hundreds of dollars to tell me you're leaving. You have wasted 2 years of time separated from your wife. Just give me 3 months. Within 3 months, if I don't solve, anyway, you're ready to pack up, we go after 3 months. And then I contacted US Department of State Visa Office in Washington, DC. I contacted Mumbai, the consulate. Those days, I didn't have Senthil back those days, 20 years, 25 years ago. Senthil is about 15 plus years. And so we contacted them and we told them about this case, how it was a legitimate bona fide marriage. It was not a fraud marriage. It was not done for immigration purposes. It was truthful. We provided whatever information. And literally, as luck would have it, somebody from Washington, D.C., one of the top senior most people from the US Department of State Visa Office was going to India for some work. And they said, we will discuss this particular case. The day he went and discussed it, that day the client got the visa. So then the word starts to spread around in the world. See, it's not that I knew better law or I knew anything. I only cared. It's what in that video you heard. From the client's perspective, I don't care how much you know unless I know how much you care. Why do we love our parents? They are not Einsteins necessarily. They are not geniuses. We love our parents because we know they love us and care about us. If the clients feel that we love them and care about them, if they feel that, and it has to come from your heart, then they will be willing to trust their lives in our hands. And once somebody trusts their lives in our hands, it is our moral, legal, ethical, and every responsibility and duty to give them 100% of our heart, mind, soul, and body to solving that person's problem. So those are another example. A mother was separated from her children, 4 children, for 8 or 9 years. I cannot even imagine the pain of the mother. And she told that for 4 years, they have been trying to get the visa. They are not getting the visa. Consulate in Chennai is denying the visa. I told why? They told because I came on tourist visa, I changed to H1B and they think I committed fraud. And they are demanding all types of documents and denying my children for 4 years. So same thing, madam, I am now prepared to go back, but very poor family, we are going to struggle. I cannot send the money to them. Same thing, I told them, give me 3 months, we will try. Same thing, contacted Chennai consulate, US consulate in Chennai, and we were able to get them the visa issued within 3 months, and the family came, and the lady told, I will give, she wanted to send pattu silk sari for me and this and that, and we don't even wear all that in America, but it was the love and the care that they had to show me. So those are very inspiring and motivating. Tough stories, of course, are if you do thousands of cases, 1 or 2 or a few will have problems. There will be roadblocks. And you feel that you have let another human being down that trusted you. And you have to live with yourself and sleep at night knowing. And sometimes when we get denials, we will file the case again in a different way, make different arguments till we fight and fight and fight to try to get that approval. So we really do try. We have had challenges, we have had roadblocks, we have problems. But I always believe that challenges and roadblocks are created to make us stronger and better as human beings and as lawyers.
Absolutely. But being a lawyer is accepting challenges, living for that.
Absolutely.
Ma'am, so I would like to end my segment. Everybody had their share of, appreciating you. So my way of appreciating you would be, I'm a person who reads a lot of poems. So there's a very famous poem, Maya Angelou, Phenomenal Woman. So, your husband also mentioned that when you walk into a room, you light it up, or you're a people person. So exactly when I read Phenomenal Woman now, your picture will be set on that note. Thank you.
That's such an honor for me. I'm really deeply honored that you would say that. The more people respect you, I always feel now I have a higher and more important role to play to be worthy of that kind of respect, love and admiration, and that we have to continue to do, each of us, each of you, because each of you is going to become a powerful, successful, important lawyer, judge, jurist, researcher, professor, scholar in your lives. And each of you is absolutely going to do amazing things with your life and change people. So really, I want to thank each of you for investing your time today to doing this, because it shows that you care, and nothing in the world matters more than care.
So, ma'am, I'll give the mic or the dais to Dylan Sharma.
So, Anushka,
Me after that, yeah.
one thing. We've been receiving a lot of questions. So what we thought, we'll club it into one question, and we'll just ask ma'am. So, ma'am, everybody wants to know, how do you manage your work life and your personal life and yet manage to stay so energetic throughout?
Yeah, and I'll just add out to that and say that ma'am said, according to ma'am, success is balance between life and work. That is her definition of success. Brilliant question, guys.
Oh, you know, I wish I've had this question is asked all the time, especially from women. For some reason, men are not asked that question as often. And I guess it's because men cannot physically give birth to the child. But even after that, majority of women, even in America, feel like their careers take a slight curve dip when soon after having the baby, because they have to stay back or do it. Now, of course, in America, because of equal laws, giving equal time to men and women after childbirth under Family Medical Leave Act, etc. Only I think 30 or 40% of men say that their career took a back seat, but 60 to 70% of women say their career went back a few steps after having childbirth and having a child. How do you balance it? So look, first of all, my DNA and my personality is extrovert. I know one person asked a question about, can I be successful as a lawyer introvert? Again, it comes back to my philosophy. It doesn't matter what your personality is. All that matters is what is in your heart, compassion and care, and what is in your head, the desire and the intellect to make a difference. So embrace whatever you are. If you're an introvert, embrace it and say, thank you, God, for making me an introvert. If you're an extrovert, say, thank you, God, for making me an extrovert. We cannot change our DNA and our personality. I can't say I want my brown skin to become black or white or pink or yellow. I can't change things. So embrace who you are, and how do you balance your life and your work? So all of it again starts with the mind, right? Everything starts in your mind. So in your mind, you tell yourself, I am not going to get frazzled about it. I am going to make decisions and choices. You have to give up something to get something in this world. I remember in one Hindi movie, I heard the famous words, kuch paane ke liye kuch khona padta hai. Okay, oh my God, I've spoken Hindi after like 20 years or something. Great, it came out. See, and it always stayed in my mind that we have to make some sacrifice. And so know that you are not going to have, like, what happens to us? We look at a woman who's a stay-at-home mother who gives full time to the kids, and we say, oh, I can't do that for my husband or my family. Then the woman who's staying at home is feeling envious, looking at us saying, oh, I can never be a professional and be financially independent and strong and bold like these women who have become lawyers. So don't worry. Everyone is looking at everybody else because the grass on the other side always looks greener. And don't think that I've had this fabulous balance in my life between family. We have made sacrifices. We have done what we needed to do. You negotiate with your spouse if you're lucky enough to have a spouse whom you can talk to and discuss it with. And if you're not, I know that's politically incorrect, but don't tolerate nonsense. Don't ever be second. Don't ever think. I feel every human being in this world deserves happiness, love, and respect. I don't care if you're a woman or a man. We deserve equal respect, dignity, love, admiration. We have to, our voice has to count. And if you don't believe in yourself, nobody else will. If you don't speak out about your tensions and problems, nobody else can read your mind. So for those who are saying, how do you balance it? Tell your husband, tell your mother-in-law, tell your father-in-law if you're living in joint family, hey, I'm stressing out. I want to make a difference. I want to work hard and make a lot of money and support the family financially. I am no less than any man. I'm going to do a great job, but I want your support. Make them become part of your team instead of your enemy. Don't attack them, because our first reaction is, oh, they are bad people. They are going to stop me. No. Visualize in your mind that, convince them why your side is beneficial for everybody, for the family. convince them, bring them on your side so that they will become your biggest champions. In fact, when you try to go and start cooking, they should say, nahi, nahi, jaake kaam karo, nahi, nahi, aur paisa, go earn some more money. Make them become your friends, make them become your champions of your cause. Believe in yourself and verbalize your fears and your concerns. Don't expect somebody to read your mind. None of us is psychologists or psychiatrists. We have only gone to law school. We have not done masters in psychiatry. And even those who have done psychology and psychiatry don't understand or read the mind of another human being. So tell your problems, verbalize it. Say, I am very stressed. I am tense. I cannot continue to do. You guys are dumping. I'm feeling. Instead of attacking them, telling you are doing the mistake. Tell I am feeling tension. I am feeling stressed. I am not able to give my time and attention to the family and to my work, but I want to continue to give 100% to my family, but I can only do that if you help me 100% on the housework fam side.
Absolutely. Can all the men put up some round of applause for all the women in here? Can we have Dylan and
Thank you. But you know what? I always say, I am not against any man. We want men who love us and respect us and admire us. I'm thrilled with my husband. I never knew that God had created such kind, good, caring, loving people as men back in India 35 years ago, right? So we need men. We need them. They are part of us. Men need women. Women need men. The world needs each other. Nobody can live in an island by themselves. So we need each of you as men to support, honor, cherish, and respect your spouses. And each of you men are going to have sons and daughters. And remember, you put your wife down, your daughter is going to learn like that and feel like a second-class citizen. So treat your wives with love, dignity, and respect. Treat your partners as equals in life's journey. And the more you put somebody on a pedestal and treat them equal or above you, the more you will benefit in life. It's very simple. The more you give to the world, the more the world gives back to us. The more greedy and selfish we are to want it for ourselves, the world gives you much less.
Dylan, you can take the stage so that I don't get later scoldings from you. So please carry on.
No worries. Good morning,
Inside
ma'am.
a secret. Yeah, please go.
Sure. Good morning, ma'am. Thank you very much for everything that you've told us. I think we've learned a lot more than just, about your life as an immigration lawyer. And I mean, this inspiration, I suppose, also extends to our personal lives as well, especially, like you said, for us men attending the conference as well. And we do hope to hopefully envision these principles, the way your husband has been. We hope to be like that as well. But
Wow.
now moving
If
into-
even one person's life can be changed, Dylan, one person, today's conversation would be so worth it. And I'm hoping it's much more than one, because one family
Hopefully.
can change that family to their relatives, and then the whole world, the ripple effect of the world will be impacted by the goodness and the kindness. So yes, I am honored and thrilled if each of you, just your life changes. And I know Aditya's life changes, and each person listening today, their lives change. That is so worth it.
We do hope so, ma'am. Thank you so much for that. Ma'am, now moving into the second segment of our program, it's a little more to deal with immigration law in itself, because, as we told you yesterday, we've got a lot of freshers, we've got a lot of students who are going to be graduating in a couple of months. And the understanding of immigration law as a subject itself is rather weak when you talk to a lot of people. And considering that right now the global situation is, it's in a lot of political turmoil. No matter where you go, you go to the United States. You said that the United States has an extremely complex immigration law program. You come to India, we have so many issues with the Bureau of Immigration and their enforcement laws. So, considering that these problems exist and we are lawyers moving into this globalized society, I have certain questions that deal with more political, more, international questions. And now I would also like to, provide you with a discretion before we do begin, because some of these questions are directed straight at the United States of America and the government in the United States of America. So I do want to make it clear that none of this is a politicized event. We really don't want any political opinion as such, but mainly based on your practical experience as a lawyer because of the clients you've interacted with. So ma'am, my first question to you is, so I read this news article recently, not a long while ago, was where Kuwait Kuwait had actually announced that they were planning on slashing their immigration, the citizenship, the number of immigrants from around 70% to 30%. And I also happened to read that Kuwait, in fact, has up to 3.3 million foreign inhabitants, which is a large number. Now, if Kuwait is planning on deporting, 40% of those immigrants, it becomes a huge problem. But the justification that the government, the prince had provided was that the Kuwait is already suffering a lot of economic hardships. The price of oil has dropped, and the economy in general is taking a beating. They obviously have to look at an employment opportunities for their own citizens, local natives of Kuwait. Now, considering that a lot of countries go through this, you look at Europe, a lot of European countries are now shutting their doors. They're not letting immigrants in, mainly because of this, is because their economy is under pressure. How do you believe countries are going to have to balance this as the years go on? Because the number of immigrants continue to explode. It's not reducing in any way. But then the international community is then going to look at a country like Kuwait and then say that, it's unjust for them to turn away immigrants. So considering that there are two very just and very, fair perspectives to this, what do you think is the solution?
Thank you so much, Dylan, for the question. It's obviously very deep and it has multiple deep ripple effects. I think we have to go back then to the fundamental cause of what causes migration. Why were people gravitating to go to Kuwait? Because whether it's Indians or other countries, Bangladesh or other countries, where people felt that there were not as many financial or economic opportunities to feed them and their families. So if the Indian economy, for example, and the economies of those countries because India has probably the most number of migrants, I think, compared to anywhere else, any other country in the world where we send our people all over the world. I think part of it, generally, it's financial or economic reasons. Other reasons are, of course, political persecution, asylum, refugee, political or financial. We have most financial, economic, political. Sometimes it's for your life and it's connected with political and freedom of thought and expression, which, by the way, for me was even more than financial. The thought that I could just speak my mind and not have to worry that someone's going to come and put me in prison or jail or do something, to me was extremely important. Because so when you were saying, Sheila, I don't want to make a political statement with you today, my thought was, as I said, what are they going to do? Kill me? Torture me? So what? That's only my body. In fact, people who have been killed for their political opinions and died have lived, their values and their policies and philosophy has lived much longer than those of us who live till 90 or 100 at ripe old age. So do I care? I mean, I care just a little for the sake of my husband when he complains, but otherwise for myself, I don't care. And so, is it fair for Kuwait, the government of Kuwait, to do that? Look, every country has to do what's good for its country. You've heard famous Otto von Bismarck. Again, because I'm a history major, I can tell you this. The famous Austrian Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, said, there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. For every country in the world, right? Every country. So what is our interest? What is, if I am Kuwait, what is my interest? And if I'm India, what is my interest? And if I'm America, what is my interest? So Kuwait says, hey, all you foreigners are coming and taking away our jobs. We want to kick you out. But are they understanding and analyzing the risk if they send out 40% or 70% of their immigrants? Will their economy collapse if they need those engineers and those doctors and those workers and those masons? How will they, because if the people, a lot of these countries, the rich Middle East countries, unfortunately, their citizens are not used to physical hard work like Indians are with their hands. And so the country may collapse. There's something called the law of unintended consequences.
Right.
And so whether that will kick into effect where their economy, which is going kind of okay and little down because of COVID-19, may crater because they did not understand that their people are not ready to work in the hot 100-degree sun, or what we call in India 35, 40 degrees centigrade sun. In America, of course, we use Fahrenheit. So whether they are capable of doing it, whether they are willing to do it, and how much do we rely on these immigrants? If they want to do it, they have to do it carefully and very purposefully, set up a commission, set up a thing, have the immigrants train the local population so that they can take that and do that work in a smart way. Because if they don't do it right, they will regret it. and then it'll be too late because people won't, once people have sold their homes or been deported, they're not going to come back even if they offer double the money. Now, if I'm very hungry, I haven't eaten, I may go back to do that work if I'm a poor person in any part of the world. So is it right? Is it wrong? Those are questions for each government and each country to answer. We cannot sit on a high horse and act like we can tell the world what to do. We can certainly express our opinion. We can express our displeasure. We can sue the thugs and the bastards, we can sue them when they break the law. We do that all the time in America. One of the main reasons we have become so well known, part of it is every time the government delays my clients' cases or does something, we sue them. And I remember for the first 10 years, my husband said, no, don't sue the federal government. Something can happen to you. And I said, what's going to happen? This is America. We have to sue if the government does. So if they're doing something wrong, you can sue. But in Kuwait, I don't think that the system of justice is like in America or even like in India. It's not a democracy. So can you sue them? Yeah, you can, but you may get nothing out of it. So plan and let the people, the immigrants who are there, figure out that they will go somewhere. And by the way, Indian economies, I know COVID-19 has affected us. Our GDP has dropped by 25% this quarter. But other than that, our country overall, India has been doing really, really well over the last 30 plus years, 20 years, 15 years. So I think there are lots of opportunities for India and Indians to either come back or to go to countries where you're respected and wanted. I always believe that those who work hard and do well have lots of opportunities anywhere and everywhere in the world. People ask me, am I afraid of competition, that some other lawyer may become the number one in the world? No, I'm very happy. If someone's number one, that means they're taking care of more people and more clients. Great. Let's join together and continue to make the world an even better place. So I know that's a very long-winded answer, but Kuwait's going to do what it has to do. It has to plan. They have to set it up. They have to do it carefully so that the transition of power from immigrants to local population has to be structured. Otherwise, their economy and their country is going to fail very badly and miserably. But the immigrants who are impacted are going to have to either come back to their home countries, whether it's India or Bangladesh or Pakistan or wherever they go back to, and find other jobs. But there's always work for good people when the economies will pick up.
Dylan, thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, I've officially taken note that we have extended time. So we are really sorry. So can we just take a few more minutes from you? Like
I saw that. I was like, oh my God, we're already like well past like an hour and a half.
I want to apologize, and I know you have further commitments. So just a few more minutes.
What about the Indian time for dinner? I'm always worried about time in India for people who are hungry.
We forgot to take our showers today, all of us. So that's fine.
Oh my God, that's not good. Thank goodness it's by Zoom or by Cisco WebEx, so we can't smell each other.
Yeah, just a few more minutes, ma'am. We'll wind up. We are really sorry.
Yeah, let's wrap up in the next. It's almost going to be almost 9 o'clock in 15 minutes. So let's wrap up in the next 10 to 15 minutes.
Wonderful.
Okay, so I'll move on to my next question, and this is something that is sort of based on your previous, the answer that you just gave us. Talk about how Kuwait has to plan its strategy and its steps in the future, considering that this is what the government has decided to say. Ma'am, now I'd like to move to something a lot closer to you, and to something that has already happened a couple of years in the past. Is with the Trump administration. Now, considering that, very evidently you don't mind giving us political answers, so I'd actually like to ask you something very, and I would want a very honest answer because you're living there and, you're practicing law under his administration as of now. So it's very evident, ma'am, the whole world knows, even though the United States doesn't want to admit it, the United States is a capitalist country. And Donald Trump as well has very capitalistic policies, even though he claims to build a mixed economy. He's very focused on the economy, he's very focused on businesses. Now, I happen to read an IRS report, and I have it in front of me right now, in 2015, which said that a lot of the undocumented citizens and, people and immigrants, basically, are bringing in close to $24 billion worth of income tax revenue, from these people. And the thing is, none of these studies seem to indicate that this population of people who are contributing to the American economy are in any way taking away employment opportunities for the locals, the natives. But, despite this fact, and this is extremely contradictory, you have the Trump administration giving us anti-migrant policies. Act for Childhood Arrivals. I think that's what it's called. And the Trump administration was very quick to cancel it and make sure that such acts don't exist anymore. So it's a very anti-immigrant policy. Now, because it's not like Kuwait had the reasoning of it's an economic burden. Evidently, Trump doesn't seem. I mean, that's not the case with the United States. So I was wondering if countries like the United States have ulterior motives, or rather administrations like the Trump administration have ulterior motives when they propose anti-immigrant policies. And considering, ma'am, sorry, I do have a follow-up question since we're running out of time. I don't want to waste too much time with the second question. Considering that you're probably moving into a possible Joe Biden administration as well. Now, Joe Biden has promised to bring back a lot of the Obama administration policies. He wants to bring back DACA. Now, considering that there's going to be a transition, do you genuinely believe, like you said, when Kuwait finally gets rid of its immigrants, once they leave, they're not going to come back? Trump has caused a lot of damage already. What are the ulterior motives he had when he did this, or when he harmed the immigration policy? And how do you believe the Joe Biden administration is now going to have to work to, reinforce that belief that America can, still provide you with the American dream? What are the steps that the Joe Biden administration is going to have to follow to reverse the damage, basically?
Okay, so it's a very deep with multiple ramifications, and we're going to try to find like a pill to solve a problem. It's not a simple solution. I genuinely believe that Trump is one of the most corrupt politicians in modern American history. I believe that he is a racist and a xenophobic, that for a person who 2 out of his 3 wives were immigrants, his mother was an immigrant from Scotland, his grandparents were immigrants from Eastern Europe, and he's a thug and a cheat, because anybody can declare bankruptcy 1 time, 2 times, because you made a mistake financially, you don't know how to count money, you're a fool, you're dumb. But if you do it 5 times, bankruptcy, that means you're truly figured out how to cheat the system, cheat your vendors, sellers, subcontractors in a manner to basically deprive them of their hard day's work and wages.
Right.
A person that lacks ethics, integrity, morality, and character. If somebody had said to me 35 years ago, America is going to vote such a person as the president, I would have said, that is not possible. This is a great country with good people. They will never vote for a thug, a cheat, a corrupt person. But the truth is that actually he lost by 3 million votes, right? He lost by 3 million votes, but he won what's called the Electoral College, because in America we have voting based on Electoral College, where you win the state even if you lose the popular vote. So when they go on about the will of the people, 3 million people willed not to have Donald Trump today in America, and they're very unhappy, and that's why they carry signs, not my president. So why did it happen? That's my short answer. Why is he saying countries like Africa and people with colored skins are shithole countries? Is because, again, it's color. When he says, why can't more people from Sweden and Norway and Finland come to America? Because they're very light-skinned people. I don't have to be a genius to figure out, when he talks about shithole countries from Africa and wonderful, why can't we get more people from Finland and Sweden, that the only difference, really big difference, is the color of the skin. I don't think they're financially, economically, scientifically geniuses or more brilliant in Finland or Sweden than, for example, in many parts of Asia. He didn't talk about Asia or Indians being fabulous for America. He keeps quiet. He lies. He lies because he said, I'm not going to go after businesses and H-1B workers, but he has made it impossible for H-1B workers to get petitions. Even people who have been here 10, 15 years, their extensions are being routinely denied. They are being asked to pack up, sell their home and hearth, and he passed 2 presidential proclamations on April 22nd of this year, 2020, and June 22nd of 2020, basically shutting down immigrants from India and others, where their children had sponsored the parents for green card to come. They shut it down, and then H-1B, J-1s, L-1s, not getting visas unless you prove that your work is in the national interest exemption of the United States. So we are talking really about it, and they're using the COVID-19 as a emergency, so-called emergency, that the country has to shut down and his executive order that he passed in the first week that he came into office was called Buy American, Hire American. We call it BAHA. And that whole thing is about how to kick out everybody from other countries and only help America and Americans to get jobs. But like you said, the research shows, similar to in the Kuwait example, that Americans are not willing to work in the fields for minimum wage, for hours on day, like the way the poor Mexicans come on H-2B visas, work hard for 8 or 10 hours a day for minimum wage and go back every year. And many of them are legal and many of them are not legal. They're undocumented workers. But they're not taking away jobs because Americans are refusing to do those jobs. Same thing in the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and math. America still today has a huge shortage and dearth of enough sufficient engineers to power the world's richest and greatest economy as of today. And Bill Gates made it very clear when he testified before Congress multiple times that the reason that he has to hire H1 and L1 workers, H1s in particular, was because he felt that I don't have enough people in America. We are aggressively trying to bring in people, but we can't. And so, you know, when Trump says, let's shut down the borders, let's not bring, let's do this, let's do that, Biden has said, hey guys, don't worry. I am going to turn the clock back. I am going to remove all the anti-immigration policies of Trump. I am going to put America back so that we can become the global superpower and leader in technology and all other fields, because America is a nation of immigrants. Do you know that they even removed the word America is a nation of immigrants from the mission statement of the USCIS, the US Citizenship and Immigration Services? Just because I removed the statement that I'm a woman or I'm a lawyer doesn't mean I'm no longer a woman. Just because the Trump administration removes that phrase doesn't mean that America is not a nation of immigrants. It just makes me think that here are a bunch of people who are just evil people, corrupt, dishonest, evil people who have double standards. And I truly believe in the goodness of every human being. Even the murderer and rapist has many good qualities. I truly believe in the goodness and kindness of human beings. And ultimately, truth and goodness will always triumph over evil. I have no doubt about it. I am very hopeful that Biden will take over. And I think this country will come back to its basic values of truth, integrity, and helping and opening our arms to the immigrant. I know Anushka said she loves poetry. Amal Lazarus says, bring me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And the whole thing about American economy and policy has always been to welcome the immigrant with open arms. That is what has made America, in my opinion, one of the greatest nations on earth, because we bring fabulous talent, the best. We attract them from all over the world and entice them. Did you know that 50% of those in the science field, Nobel Prize winners in America, were foreign born? That's 50%. Imagine if we didn't have these people in America. So, you know, yes, we are going through a big dark cloud in our country, in our politics in America, but I'm hoping that dark cloud will pass by, that bright sunshine and blue skies will shine through. And I know when I say our and my country, people ask me, but you just said my country for India. How can you say my country for America? So I have love to both countries. I always say my country of my birth and my adopted country. I am an overseas citizen of India, so I'm a partial Indian, but I'm also a citizen of the United States. And like many of you, I came through when I was an F1 student, J1 into international exchange program, H1B worker, green card, and citizen. So I truly believe in the greatness of America as coming out of this dark cloud. I also believe in the greatness and goodness of all human beings wanting to make the world a better place. Just sometimes we are mistaken. We are all led astray, and we all need an opportunity to come back. I think ultimately we're all going to meet our maker as we grow older, and God knows Trump is already 74. He's in his mid 70s. He doesn't have too much time to meet his maker. I'm sorry. He better start becoming a good human being. My father would always joke that a lot of people do a lot of evil their full life. And then after 60 or 70, they quickly build a temple or a mosque or a church to beg God for mercy and to pray for, please God, forgive me because I'm coming close to the end of my physical life in this world. So Trump better watch what is coming to him, because in India, we believe in karma. And we believe that if you do bad to others, you're going to pay the price for it in your next life. So I don't, you and I don't have to worry about him. His time is coming pretty soon. And with his getting COVID, I don't think it's about, forever anyway. But
Absolutely. My words going off. Yeah. So do you
Thank
want
you
to
for
do?
that answer. I'm very.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got just one last question, then we will wrap up this session.
Yeah. Last
Wonderful.
question.
Yeah, perfect. So, ma'am, now moving into a more international scale, because we've got students who, we study international human rights, etc. This is more so directed towards organizations like the United Nations, the UNHCR. And considering that you said you've done comparative immigration, I really thought I should be asking you this question. Just a very quick background into why this question came around was, when you go back to the Sri Lanka massacre, or you have the civil war that took place in Cambodia, the United Nations, specifically the Secretary General of the United Nations, failed to make any sort of positive statement during the time of these conflicts. The UNHCR itself failed to, really mobilize internally displaced persons during the time. And as a result of it, 30% of these people who were IDPs were in fact slaughtered, especially in Cambodia. And it was decades before, later that, this war tribunal was created and Pol Pot was finally tried and the Khmer Rouge finally came to an end. Now in light, and furthermore, you have countries like the United States where reports say that a lot of your immigrants who come into the United States are doing so because they're escaping violence, but for no other reason. Illegal immigrants, I'm sorry, are doing it because they're trying to escape violence, and yet the United States constantly focuses on shutting borders. Now, in light of these facts that I've given you, do you believe that organizations like the United Nations, the UNHCR, are probably becoming a lot more redundant? And as a solution to it, do you think that they need to start mandatory resolutions, such as sanctions, maybe tax impositions on the countries that are refusing to adhere to policies, rather than just being a directive organization? So what do you believe is the right way for international bodies to go?
Yeah, so again, very deep, multifaceted, multi-layered question, Dylan. The truth is that when any organization or any government or any people or anybody relies on somebody else for money, then you are beholden to that person or that country. So the problem with the United Nations is it doesn't have funding, independent funding. It relies on each country to chip in some money to pay for the United Nations to do its work. And the fact is that America, the United States of America, has been paying majority of the share for the United Nations on every level. And so when Trump says, I'm going to cut it, I'm going to get out of the World Health Organization, I'm going to do this, why should America pay majority of the money to prop up an international organization that we think is useless? Then we become beholden and we are afraid to speak or criticize friends of America, or afraid to talk against it and say, hey, what you're doing is illegal. You're shutting down borders and preventing refugees and asylees from entering the United States is a violation of human rights law and is against what your country signed treaties agreeing to take in refugees. The number of refugees has dropped to the lowest level in the last 30, 40, 50 years, I think to 15,000 last year from the Trump administration. So everything that America is doing now is based on the views of one person who has never been in politics. So yes, people voted him because they thought he was not a politician and he would be wise, good business person. But in fact, he's clueless about countries and about, unfortunately, and I wish he had studied history and political science like the way I did, those useless subjects, as my father called it, because that helps you to understand how the world works, how regimes have worked, how corrupt, incompetent, and inefficient people have caused destruction and havoc and ruin to countries and cultures and civilizations. And, it's very possible that everything he's doing, maybe, hopefully from a good place, is actually going to has already resulted in America losing its name, reputation, and credibility, as Biden has repeatedly pointed out, in the world among, friends and allies and enemies. Enemies love us and our friends hate us. That's not a good sign for America to be in. It's a horrible place for a country to be in where we come across as people with no heart and with no soul. So will this continue? Will all this happen? What can we do? What can the United Nations as a world body do? The UN can only issue wishful thinking wish lists. The United Nations has no real power. I mean, it's a body, and the UN is a member of the Security Council. The UN votes, any member votes against a rule, then that country, then it can't pass muster. You can't even issue resolutions, as all of us know. So can we create another body? I know that the United Nations was created because after World War I, the then organization failed miserably to create it. The UN has been partially, helpful. We haven't had, thank goodness, World War III, though we've come close to it in the Middle East and other stresses and tensions across the globe with countries. And so there's always going to be tension between people. People always want to conquer and aspire to take, colonies in whatever fashion, whether territories. India has certain colonies, America has colonies in whatever fashion from years, decades. And so can an organization like the United Nations change, what can it do? I think if it relies on money, if it's mandatory and we all say it has to be, the world has to vote that country and make it mandatory. But the way it's set up now, it's set up to pander to the richest, most powerful countries, and the rest of us are just watching and observing. That's why Jawaharlal Nehru created the non-aligned movement, for India to become a member of the non-aligned movement. So we would neither be pro-Russia or pro-America, but we would try to keep an independent middle ground. And to some extent, we were helpful, but now with the sort of, I guess, to some extent, the Iron Curtain having been lifted, the non-aligned movement is less powerful and less vocal than it was 30 years ago or 40, 50 years ago. We're in an unusual time. I think we have to get out of sticking our head in the sandbox. I think we have to look at the world in a very big picture. And I think each of you as lawyers can play a very, very, very important and vital role to doing good things, to making a difference, to speaking your voice, to fighting against injustice, to fighting for justice and rights for the downtrodden and the underprivileged. And countries, whether it is individuals or families or countries that we feel have been unjustly, people are trying to eliminate racism. I mean, Hitler did it in World War II in trying to eliminate Jewish people, and there were millions of people murdered in gas chambers. And the world then created the International Tribunal, after that. But at that point, the people who did those crimes were following the law of what their dictator told them to do. So, how do you deal with it? As long as human beings continue, there's always going to be good and evil in human nature. Always good has to try to fight against evil. And I know that with each of you as lawyers and law students, we are going to have more good in India and in the world. And so because I'm mindful of the time, I know we're past the time, I am probably going to say, I'm sure we could continue this discussion forever. But I think it's time to just say, you know what? I will do my part for a better world and a stronger world, and I will fight against injustice. I will be very, very, very strong, bold, and confident to make a difference in the lives of other human beings and nations and people. And no other profession in the world. I don't care if you're a doctor taking care of physical health or an engineer measuring buildings or building bridges or taking care of the environment. You cannot have the kind of deep-rooted, long-lasting impact that we as lawyers can have in the world. So congratulations on choosing to become lawyers. Congratulations on truly wanting to make a difference in the lives of people and continue to change the world and make it better. It's truly been an honor and a privilege, and I only wish each of you great success and good luck. Thank you.